Oh man, this is such a missed opportunity. I had high hopes for this game, but I've been betrayed by my expectations. And just to be clear, I don't think that this is a bad game in any way, but it could have been so much more. In Kena, Bridge of Spirits, you play as a young spirit guide who has to heal corrupted spirits and guide them to the afterlife and clear the corruption left by them in the world. Spirit guides have a strong connection with nature, and so they get help from those little gnomes called Rot, for whatever reason. You have to search the environment and solve little puzzles and minigames to find those little guys, so that they'll help you fight or clear paths or find treasure or purify parts of the world. Sounds like a really neat idea, and while it's not original, there aren't that many games utilizing this concept. Well, and the number didn't increase with this game. This intriguing setting serves more as window dressing and doesn't really impact the mechanics that much. I'm going to explain what I mean by that, but before that I want to mention something else that perfectly encapsulated my feelings about this game. So, a popular German Let's Player lamented on Twitter that not a lot of people watched his Kena video. And one of the replies caught my eye. The guy kinda apologized for not watching his video because he has seen too much of that particular genre already. So, what genre? Action adventures? Because that doesn't describe anything about a game, aside from it being in real time and having some form of puzzles. And you only get that if you are already familiar with gaming terminology. Because if you aren't, those words can mean something completely different. But okay, I mean, Zelda is an action-adventure. Resident Evil is an action-adventure. Tomb Raider is an action-adventure. Overlord is an action-adventure. And all those games play and feel completely different. So yeah, the genre description means nothing. But okay, me mentioning the last one at least shows that I agree with the guy that Kena is an action-adventure, and by that, part of a genre that consists of thousands of games. My problem isn't that it is yet another fantasy action-adventure, but that it isn't more than just a simple fantasy action-adventure, even though all the ingredients are there and the blueprints to utilize all its elements to their greatest potential already exist. From its reveal trailer, it looked like a game in the vein of Pikmin or Overlord. You have a growing cohort of little fantasy creatures that can carry stuff around and attack your enemies, that you have to guide to special locations, that can dress up in silly outfits, and that you need to progress, more or less. But it's all a bit superficial or highly contextual. In Pikmin or Overlord, there was a kind of real-time tactics element in leading your little helpers. You had to think about their placement in battles and had to micromanage a bit to get through the harder encounters. For exploration and puzzle solving, you sometimes had to, and other times were rewarded for, choosing the correct type of creature for a certain task. And having a higher number of helpers gave you advantages or let you complete multiple tasks simultaneously. You won't find anything of this in Kena. The Rod seem to be more of a recharge mechanic for special abilities and spells than anything else. Whenever a fight starts, they flee and you have to build up courage by damaging enemies to use them during combat. And when I say use them, I don't mean lead them into combat, position them in the most advantageous way and have them assist you. Nah, courage is just a resource you need to spend on special abilities or environmental interactions. So if you want to purify an enemy spawning plant, you need to spend 1 courage. And if you want to use a healing flower, you also need to spend 1 courage. If you want to power up a melee or ranged attack, you can do so in exchange for 1 courage. And yeah, you can have your rod charge an enemy and stun them for a few seconds, but this is just another special ability you pull off with the press of a single button. The rod don't really inhabit the world, even though the game tries to have you believe they do. They follow you around, they sit down on rocks and bridges, hide in pots and bowls, and are just being cute while interacting with the environment. Or more accurately, posing in the environment. Whenever there is something around for them to pose, they just pop into existence. They don't need to find their way around the environment, they can just teleport to wherever they're supposed to be. And you never need to worry about them. They can't be hurt or killed or incapacitated in any way. The little guys that are on screen are just a visual representation of, well, mostly an experience bar. It's not that more rot give you more options, but whenever you collect a certain number of rot, your level increases and you become more powerful, or something like that. But what the game lacks in interactivity, it makes up in visual, not really fidelity, but quantity. There is a spot for the rot to stand or sit around every few meters, and if you couple that with the huge number of different hats each rot can wear and the obligatory photo mode, then there's a lot of fun to be had with the game visually. Yeah, the rot won't run through a pumpkin patch and wear the pumpkins as hats, but you can still have a bit of fun with dressing them up. And well, the game is beautiful. The art style reminds me strongly of Pixar movies with really expressive characters and detailed and creatively designed enemies that all contain elements of nature like plants and trees, but in a distorted and corrupted way. While the corrupted areas are the usual grey and dead environments, the rest of the game is colorful and picturesque. But even then, well, while it does look beautiful, it's pretty much all the same. You get your lush forests, or lush meadows, or lush mountain paths. There's the occasional dark cave in between, and the whole point of the game is to reach the top of a mountain, so I guess there are going to be some snow-covered areas later, but you won't get too much visual variety when it comes to the environments. Though, this is really just a minor grievance of mine. The world presents you with a lot of stunning landmarks and set pieces, and the game never looks bland or boring. Gameplay, on the other hand, well, I already talked about how the rot aren't utilized. Well, they just aren't. Yeah, they sometimes have to carry a rock or something to a specific spot so that you can climb higher up. And sometimes you have to solve a small puzzle to clear a path for your rot, and there are some instances where you can transform all your rot into this dear serpent-like spirit to have them destroy obstacles. But this never gets deeper than a puddle and doesn't control all that well. I mean, it functions well enough, but it doesn't feel good to control. It's hard to explain. The camera is too close to you and doesn't show enough of the area around you when you have to control the rot. You always have to wait just a bit too long for an animation to end before you can interact with something or continue on. It's like all the rot mechanics were tacked on when actually the game should have been designed around these mechanics. Combat isn't much better. You have fast and strong melee attacks that don't really flow together. Enemy attacks seem to have priority over your own, so the unlockable charge-up attacks and jump attacks aren't as useful as they could have been. You get a recharging shield to block incoming attacks and can even parry and counter attacks with the right timing, but I found this to be really awkward and finicky a lot of the time, and I believe it once again has to do with you having to wait for an animation to end. So the wind down after an attack just feels a bit too long before Kena activates her shield. Dodging works fine for the most part, though here as well you sometimes have to wait an eternity after an attack before Kena actually jumps out of the way. Enemy variety is good enough for what this combat system is trying to accomplish. It's a bit more complicated than Zelda, but doesn't get near the complexity of a spectacle fighter. Which isn't a bad thing, I just think the game could have either had more of a flow or had to be a bit slower with a higher emphasis on waiting for the right moment to strike instead of wailing on a bunch of enemies and dodging a barrage of attacks. And having the rod support you during battle would have helped too. You also get some tools like a bow or bombs to use against flying or armored enemies, and you can also use those tools to blow up rocks, hit some targets, and sometimes even in pretty creative ways. The exploration is fun enough, but mostly quite shallow, like the rest of the game. Climbing doesn't get more complex than it is in the Uncharted games, and platforming isn't much more complicated either. You can only climb in designated climbing zones, and if a ledge isn't meant for you to hold onto, then it doesn't matter that Kena could perfectly reach it, she will just goofily slide down. And when you drop down a bottomless pit, or well, just too far down even though it might look perfectly manageable, you get to a loading screen. and then transported to a checkpoint. Yeah, the game doesn't want you to get back into the action fast. It's not that you get transported too far back or that you have to repeat the same challenges over and over again. Most of the time you just have to walk back to where you died, so all it does is wasting your time. When you die during a boss fight, you don't get a prompt to retry or back out of the fight, you simply get booted out of the arena, have to walk back up to it, trigger the cutscene again, thankfully are able to skip it, and then you get to try again. And that's just it with the game. Nothing is really bad, but also nothing, the beautiful art design aside, is really outstanding. This is a shallow but fun experience with a lot of little flaws that can, not necessarily will, annoy you the more time you spend with the game. It works fine for the most part, with some occasional glitches or frame rate issues, and if it were priced at $20 or $30, I would recommend it wholeheartedly as a simple but enjoyable little action game. Since this game costs about $40 and even has a deluxe edition for $50, it's a bit harder for me to recommend it. If you, like me, expect something akin to Pikmin or Overlord, well, maybe hold on to your money. But if you are okay with a very casual Zelda-like experience with very linear progression in a stunningly beautiful world, then go for it. I think the game should have been either cheaper or deeper, but as it stands right now, it isn't bad. I'm just disappointed. But maybe you won't be. And with that, I bid you adieu, have a great day, and I hope to see you again on the next game.